The Imperium of Man does not run on Space Marines. There are roughly 1 million of them in the entire galaxy, and you will never meet one. The Imperium runs on people whose names appear nowhere in any archive, only a line number in a ledger and a date after which the line gets struck through. There are trillions of them. They do not live long, they work until the body fails, and they die in places whose names never reach a report. Every one of them believes the work matters. Every one of them is correct. That is precisely why the whole thing holds together. You are about to live 12 of those lives. 12 different bodies, 12 different deaths. The same Imperium sitting on top of all of them. None of these lives will be heroic. None of them will end well. And not one of them could have been removed without the rest collapsing. We start with the quietest, the vox-operator. You do not shoot. You have a laser gun, it hangs across your back, and in 4 years of service you have taken it off safety twice. Your actual weapon weighs 40 kilograms, mounts to your spine on a steel frame, and puts an antenna above your head that stands as tall as a man. That antenna is visible from 3 kilometers. You worked this out in your second week. Nobody explained it. You simply noticed that the company replaces vox-operators more often than it replaces sergeants. An enemy marksman looks at a battlefield and picks a target. He is not going to spend a shot on a Guardsman. There are 300 of those. He picks the one with the iron rod over his head. Kill the Vox, and 300 men go blind at the same moment. So you walk 3 paces behind the officer. Always 3 paces, always inside the range of his voice. And every marksman within 3 kilometers now knows there is an officer standing next to the antenna. You are bait for 2 people. The work goes like this. 14 hours in the headset. Not during a fight. A fight is easier. In a fight you pass coordinates and numbers do not touch you. The hard part is between fights. Between fights the channels stay open, and you hear everything. You hear second company request evacuation. You hear command refuse. You hear second company ask again, off protocol this time, using their voices instead of the codes. You hear command explain that the corridor is cut and that an attempt to force it would cost more men than it saves. You hear second company stop transmitting. Then you hear nothing for 2 hours. Then the channel opens again, and someone in it is breathing and not speaking. Just breathing. 20 minutes of it. You sit and listen to a stranger breathe, because you do not have the authority to close a channel. Command closes channels. Command closes it after 23 minutes. You write 3 words in the log. Channel 2, contact lost. After 4 years, you know the voice of every officer in the regiment. You know which of them panics. You can hear it in the breathing. You know which of them lies about casualties. You know which of them rounds the survivor count upward, so the officio prefectus does not come asking. You know more about this regiment than the colonel does. And you can tell nobody, because channel traffic is restricted information, and disclosing restricted information is aiding the enemy. You die on a planet whose name you never learned. The regiment landed 4 days ago, and the landing zone in the orders was a string of letters and numbers. There is a marksman working from the ruins to the east. You do not see him. You are transmitting a request for reinforcement at the time. The shot goes through the antenna and through you. You drop forward onto the frame, and the voxcaster stays powered, pinned under your weight against the ground. It keeps transmitting for another 40 minutes. Command hears an open channel. They hear the sound of a firefight. They hear a company officer calling for his vox-operator and getting nothing back. That is your final contribution to the war. An open channel nobody closed. A line appears in the regimental log. Vox-operator, identification number, contact lost. 3 words. The same 3 words you wrote about other people for 4 years. They replace you the next day. The set comes off your body, gets cleaned, gets checked, gets handed to somebody new. He will also notice, in his second week, that they replace vox-operators more often than sergeants. The recycling operator. Hive Primus, level -64. You work a line that takes raw material in from above and puts pressed bricks out below. The shift is 12 hours. The output quota was set by the administratum and has not been adjusted since your great-grandfather worked this same level. The material arrives down a chute. The chute is wide, about 1.5 meters, and lined with iron, because the material is heavy and it falls a long way. You know what it is. Everyone knows what it is. It is not a secret. It is simply a thing nobody says out loud. The way nobody says out loud what the water table is doing, or what a life costs on level -60. The Imperium does not discard biomass. The Imperium cannot afford to discard biomass, because 800 million people live in this hive. Each of them eats 3 times a day, and there has been no arable land on this planet since the Great Crusade. So there is a chute, and therefore there is you. Your job could not be simpler. You stand at the sorting grate and you pull out whatever must not reach the grinders. Metal, ceramite, augmetics. Occasionally a bolt pistol if somebody important came down. Metal goes in the right-hand tray. Everything else rides on. 4 tons pass through your hands per shift. For the first 2 weeks, you do not eat at all. You come home, you lie facing the wall, and your mother sets a plate with a gray brick on it beside you. And you look at the brick, and the brick looks back. In the 3rd week, you eat it, because hunger is stronger. By the 4th week, you have stopped thinking about it. The brain is built mercifully. It cannot sustain horror for 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, so it simply stops filing the thing as horror. Within a year, you will be eating corpse starch during your shift, standing at the grate, gloves still on. You will not care. And that, rather than the chute, is the Imperium's actual work. You will never know. You simply finish the shift and go and check whether he is home that evening. That time, he was home. 6 years later, he will not be, and on that evening you will be standing at the grate, pulling metal out of 4 tons, not knowing whether he is in it. The shift foreman says your work is sacred. He says it every morning before the start, at the shrine of the Omnissiah in the corner of the floor, the one covered in oil stains. He says the hive is a single organism, and you are part of its digestion, and that refusing the work is refusing your neighbor's life. He is right. That is the unpleasant part. Stop this line for a week, and 800 million people begin to starve. Stop it for a month, and the hive eats itself anyway, only without sorting, without hygiene, and without a chute. The Imperium did not design this out of cruelty. The Imperium designed it out of arithmetic. You die of your lungs. It is not dramatic. You do not fall into the grinders. That happens to new hands, and you have been here 29 years. You simply breathe the vapor for 29 years, and in the 30th, you start coughing blood, and the level Medicaid writes you 3 days off shift, and you die at home, facing the wall, in the same position you lay in during your first 2 weeks. They will collect your body. That is standard. Remains are returnable to the cycle, and the family receives compensation equal to 1 week of rations. You go down the chute, possibly to your own line, possibly to the one next door. It depends on which is running. Somebody will be standing at the grate pulling metal out of you. Your left arm augmetic, fitted after a workplace injury in your 9th year. Good unit. Plenty of service left in it. The Guardsman. They took you at 19. Not arrested, not press-ganged, taken, under the tithe. Every world in the Imperium pays a tithe. Some pay in ore, some in grain, some in people. Your world paid in people, because there was no ore and the grain fed the population. The commission reached your district in the 3rd month. Selection took 4 minutes per man. Height, teeth, eyesight, a question about seizures, a question about loyalty to the emperor. Everyone answers the second question the same way, so it is not asked for the answer. It is asked so they can watch the pause before it. You did not pause. They wrote you down. Training lasted 11 weeks. You were taught to hold formation, clean a laser gun, dig a trench to full depth, and drop on command. You were not taught tactics. Tactics are an officer's concern. You were not taught first aid. First aid is a medic's concern. You were not taught anything you would use twice. Then the transport. 8 months in the hold of a troop ship, bunks stacked 3 high, air pushed through filters faster than through lungs. You learned the names of 40 men in your section. Half of them will be gone after the first landing, but you do not know that yet, so you learn the names honestly. Landfall on the 4th day out of the warp. The planet is called something. The name is in the orders, but the orders were read by an officer, and the officer told you a direction and a time. You are going north. You move at 0600. The Imperium does not consider it necessary to tell you what you are dying for, because the name would not change anything you do. The first engagement lasts 40 minutes. You will not see the enemy. That is the thing nobody tells you about the guard. You will fire in the direction the sergeant indicated, into smoke, into rubble, into a slope lit by tracer. Somebody out there dies from your shot, and somebody does not, and you will never learn which or how many. You will see your own side very clearly. All of them, from 2 meters, in detail. Your laser gun is reliable. It will not jam, it runs off a power cell, and the cell can be charged at a campfire if things get bad enough. It punches through light armor and human bodies. It does not punch through ceramite, tyrannid chitin, or the frontal plate of anything heavier than a truck. Nobody told you that either. You find out yourself 18 minutes into your first fight, when your section empties its entire load into one orc, and the orc arrives anyway. You survive that, not because you did anything correctly, but because the orc chose the man to your left. 6 months in, you are a veteran. A veteran in the Guard is somebody who has survived 3 landings. It is not a rank, it is a statistic. New arrivals will look at you as a man who knows things, and you will give them advice, and the advice will be useless because you survived by accident, and accident cannot be taught. Your rations are the same as everyone's. Korps starch, 1 brick per meal, water from a purifier that occasionally works. Veterans tell new arrivals not to ask what the brick is made of. Veterans found out themselves on their second campaign and have not asked since. Once a month there is a delivery. A truck brings ammunition, bricks, and clean underclothes, and riding with it comes a ministorum preacher. He speaks for 40 minutes. He says you fight for the Emperor, that your death has meaning, that the fallen return to his light. You listen, standing in formation, and you believe him. This is the part outsiders get wrong, because from a distance, it looks like you are being lied to. You are not being lied to. You saw a warp rift open on your 3rd landing, a hole across the horizon with things coming out of it. You know demons exist. You saw them with your own eyes from 300 meters, and you saw a preacher walk forward with an aquila raised, and you saw the thing stop. After that, faith stops being a matter of conviction. It becomes an observation. You die in your 9th month, on your 7th landing, to artillery. There is not even a moment. You are digging, because the trench has to be deeper by dark, and the thing that has been in the air for 40 seconds arrives. You do not hear it. The shell outruns its own sound, and that is the single mercy the war extends to you. 9 men remain out of 40. They fold them in with the remnants of another section, appoint a new sergeant, and send them north. The regimental dispatch describes your battle in 1 phrase. Positions held, casualties acceptable. Acceptable is a formal Departamento Munitorum term. It means the cost of replacement was lower than the cost of withdrawal. The Void-born. You were born on a ship. Not shipped out, not recruited, born. On a lower deck of an Imperial Navy battleship, in a compartment the schematics label as technical and which actually houses 4,000 people. The ship is called what it is called. You learned the ship's name before your mother's because the ship's name is spoken at every morning prayer and your mother died when you were 2. The crew of a battleship is around 100,000 people. Of those, you have met perhaps 300 in your entire life. The ship is enormous. People usually fail at this point because they picture a large aircraft. Forget the aircraft. Your ship is 8 kilometers long. It has districts nobody has entered in 2 centuries. It has decks sealed off by a fire in the 33rd millennium and never opened since. It has gangs living in the ventilation who do not answer to officers because officers do not go in there. You work in the engine spaces, 8th circuit, fuel pumps. The job goes like this. You watch a pressure gauge older than your family line. If the needle enters the red, you strike the valve with a wrench and recite the litany. They taught you the litany. They did not teach you why it works. Nobody aboard knows why it works, including the tech priest who dictated it to you. It works if you strike the valve in the correct rhythm. The rhythm is set by the litany, hence the litany. You can read 14 symbols. That is enough for your gauge. You cannot read letters. Once a generation, there is a translation during which the Geller field falters. The Geller field is the only thing between the hull and what is outside. And what is outside in the warp regards 8 kilometers of steel as a thin membrane with food inside it. When the field flickers, the lights die, and everyone aboard stops moving. Your father told you about one in his lifetime. The field flickered for 11 seconds. In 11 seconds, Deck 4 stopped answering. They sealed it without opening it. It is still sealed. There is presumably still something in there, and the ship has been flying with it for 180 years. You live 3 corridors from that bulkhead. You hear things through it when the ship is in the warp. You do not find this strange. You grew up with it. What you find strange is planets. You saw one once through a viewport on an upper deck where they let you go as a reward for 20 years without a disciplinary mark. You looked at the planet for 8 minutes. You did not understand what you were seeing. The sky outside, that is what broke you. Your whole life the sky has been above you, made of iron, studded with rivets, an arm's length away. Out there the sky was below and beside and everywhere, and it did not end. You stepped back after 8 minutes and then did not sleep for 3 nights. You never went up there again, although the right was yours. Once a year there is a festival, the ship's consecration day, when extra rations come down to the lower decks and gatherings are permitted. Your compartment sings. The songs are yours alone. They exist nowhere else in the Imperium. They accumulated here over 8 centuries and pass by voice. You know 40 of them. Half are about pump maintenance, a quarter are about officers, and those are obscene, and the officers hear them and pretend not to follow the words. One song is about Deck 4. It is sung quietly and never to the end. You die at 61, which for the lower decks is very old. Not in battle. You were in 7 engagements, and in all 7 you sat at your pump and struck the valve with a wrench and never saw a single shot fired. The ship shuddered, the lights failed, you struck the valve. Once the compartment next door was vented on the bridge's order to kill a fire, and you heard it happen through the bulkhead. 12 seconds. You die of heart failure, at your pump, on shift. The body goes to reclamation, as Navy regulation requires. Your name enters the ship's book of remembrance, and once a year it is read aloud, together with 4,000 other names from that year. Your son takes your place at the pump. He is 28 and has worked 1 compartment over for 7 years, and he knows the litany by heart. He does not know why it works either. The servitor. You stole food. It matters to say that at the start, because after this you will not be able to recall it. You took 6 ration bricks from a food store on level -42 because your sister was 9 and had not eaten in 4 days. They caught you at the exit. The Arbitrator did not even strike you. They restrained you and walked you out. Sentencing took 2 minutes. Theft of Imperial property. Servitorization. The Imperium has no prisons in the ordinary sense. A prison is an expense, and the Imperium does not spend biomass on storage. The Imperium uses it. They walked you into an Adeptus Mechanicus workshop, and there they stripped you, weighed you, measured you, and entered you into a register. You screamed. Everybody screams. The tech priests are used to it. There is a background drone of vox litanies in the workshop that covers some of it. Then the procedure. By regulation, your mind is erased, completely. A servitor is not supposed to remember, want, or understand. A servitor executes a command and confirms execution. That is what the regulation says. The regulation was written on Mars, where the procedure is performed by high-ranking adepts running the full cycle. You are not on Mars. You are in a workshop attached to a hive manufactorum, where 200 condemned pass across the table in a shift, and the standard allows 11 minutes each. In 11 minutes, they do what they can fit. They socket the skull, they suppress the frontal lobes, they test the response to a command, and they move you down the line. They test the response. They do not test what is left. Your will was removed cleanly. You will never want anything again. Everything else is still there. They socket your skull, take your arms, and fit manipulators, because arms are fragile and manipulators last longer. They leave you your eyes, one of yours and one lens. They leave you a mouth, but the tongue is sutured, because a servitor does not speak. A servitor confirms a command with a tone. They stand you in Bay 9. You load crates. 11 kilograms, belt to pallet, 180-degree turn, return. 14 seconds per cycle. 18 hours a day. 6 hours in the charging alcove. You do this for 40 years. Somebody is in there the entire time. He cannot speak, cannot stop, cannot turn his head unless a command to turn the head has been issued. But he counts. He counts crates, because counting is the only thing that does not require will. He reached 9 million in the 6th year and started again, and occasionally, very occasionally, somebody familiar walks past Bay 9. In your 23rd year of service, a woman of about 30 walked past with a child. She works the same tier as a receiving clerk. She passes you roughly once a fortnight, and she never looks in your direction, because one does not look at servitors. It is simply not done. It would be like looking at a hoist. She does not know. You know. You recognized her on the very first pass, 14 years after they took you, by the way she holds one shoulder. She holds it exactly as she did at 9. You cannot call out. The tongue is sutured. You cannot turn. No command was issued. You load a crate. 11 kilograms, belt to pallet, 180-degree turn. She walks past you 400 more times over the next 17 years. You die in the bay, standing. Servo failure in the left manipulator, then a cascade fault, then a stop. A tech priest arrives 40 minutes later, scans you, and records the expiry of the unit. They strip you. The manipulators come off. They are still serviceable. They will go on somebody else. The socket comes out, gets cleaned, goes on somebody else. The lens goes on somebody else. The biological remainder goes to reclamation, where somebody at a grate will pull out the metal the workshop missed. In the Mechanicus register, a decommissioning mark appears beside your inventory number. Your name is not in the register. It was struck from the documents on the day of the procedure. Because a servitor is not a person. 6 ration bricks. The astropath. They found you at 7. You moved a cup without touching it, in front of witnesses, and 11 days later 3 figures in black arrived at your door with a document your mother could not read. The Imperium does not kill psychers. The Imperium collects them. Once a century, a black ship comes to a world. It takes everyone who has been found and carries them to Terra, and it brings nobody back. Parents know this. Your mother knew. She handed you over without a word, because the alternative is concealing a psycher, and concealing a psycher gets a district raised. You traveled on the black ship for 4 years. There were around 2,000 children in the hold. The hold is partitioned into cells because an untrained psycher is a whole in reality, and 2 of them placed side by side begin to resonate. Sometimes a cell goes quiet. Then the Sisters of Silence come, open it, and remove whatever is left. The Sisters of Silence are not Sisters of Battle. People confuse them constantly. The Sisters of Silence do not pray, because they do not have souls in the sense that you have one. Near them the warp goes death. Near them you can do nothing at all, and those are the only 4 years of your life during which your head is quiet. You will miss that quiet afterwards, for the rest of your life. On Terra, they sort you. Most go into the fuel, and we will come back to that at the very end. A minority go further because they have the will to survive the binding. They passed you further. They prepare you for months, fasting, prayer, rites of purification, and the entire time it is explained to you that not all of you will survive. They walk you in as a procession, 100 at a time. The Emperor puts a portion of himself into you. This is not a metaphor and not a ceremony. Your soul receives a mark, and after that mark, the demons of the warp cannot eat it while you carry a message. The rite takes several hours, and you scream for all of them. The touch of the Emperor's mind overloads a human being entirely. Somebody in your 100 will die on the floor. Somebody will lose their mind and be led away. The price of the mark is your sight. It burns out the optic nerves. Occasionally the rite takes hearing or smell or touch instead, but that is rare, and you are not lucky. You are 12 years old, and you will never see anything with your own eyes again. In exchange, you receive a different sight. You feel a room. You feel people. You feel the anxiety of a man 3 meters away better than he does. Within a year, you will stop noticing that you are blind. Within 10, you will move through ship corridors faster than the sighted. The work goes like this. They seat you in a sending chamber and dictate a message. The message goes into the warp. It does not travel in a straight line. The warp has no straight lines. It goes into an ocean of nightmare and searches there for another blind soul carrying the same mark. About half arrive. So an astropathic sending is not text. It is an image, a symbol, a dream the recipient has to interpret. Your working language is metaphor. You transmit a request for reinforcement to a besieged world. You transmit it as the image of a starving child at a locked door. At the other end sits another blind person, and they see this dream, and they have to understand that it concerns reinforcement and not famine. Sometimes they do not. Sometimes the reinforcement arrives 11 years later at a world that no longer exists, and nobody is at fault because everybody did their job correctly. Every transmission opens the door a little. Briefly, not far. And every time, something on the other side looks back. You die in your 49th year of service, mid-transmission. Not to a demon, to where? An astropath's brain is not built for that many passes. The tissue burns through, and one day a session simply does not end. You sit in the chair, blood runs from your nose, and the sending goes out without its closing symbol. At the other end, they receive an interrupted dream. A child at a door, and the door beginning to open. And that is all of it. The recipient logs it. Message incomplete, source lost, and passes it on as best he can. The Navigator. You were fortunate. People will tell you that your whole life, and they will be telling the truth. You were born into the Navis Nobilite, into a family whose bloodline predates the Imperium. Your house owns 3 palaces on Terra, and a voice in the body that sends its own man to the High Lords. The Paternoval envoy speaks for every navigator at once, and your house has, twice in 1,000 years, put its own candidate in that seat. As a child, you had your own floor, your own tutors, and your own guards. You have 3 eyes. The third sits in the center of your forehead and opens at 13. Before that, it is under the skin, detectable as a thickening. When it opens, they lock you in a room with no mirrors for 2 weeks, because the first thing a navigator does with his eye is look. A navigator's gaze kills what it looks at. Not figuratively. An ordinary human dies from a single look through the open third eye. Hence, 2 weeks with no mirrors and no servants. Your cousin opened hers ahead of schedule, with a nurse in the room. They carried the nurse out. Your eye sees the warp. Not through instruments, not through ritual, directly. And there, in the warp, burns the Astronomicon, the beacon from Terra, the only fixed point in an ocean that changes shape while you look at it. You steer a ship by that light. The work goes like this. You are alone, always alone, in a dome at the top of the ship, cut off from the crew because the crew must not see your eye. You sit in a chair, you open the eye, you look into the place where there is no space and no time, and you hold a course for 8 days. 8 days without sleep. You cannot sleep in transit. Let go of the beacon and the ship falls out, and it will not fall out where you wanted. You see what is in there. It sees you as well. That is not a novice's fear. It is a professional reality, and it was explained to you at 17 on your first solo transit. There are things in the warp for which the light of the Astronomicon is a campfire in a forest, and the ships traveling toward that light are what gathers around a campfire. Some of them have learned to look like shore. Your instructor told you about a captain who came out of the warp 18 light years off target because his navigator steered for a second beacon that does not exist. It happens once to every navigator, usually inside the first 20 years. Yours came in your 9th, when you saw a light coming from the wrong direction and wanted very badly to go to it. You did not. You had an upbringing and a fear of your mother who steered ships for 300 years before you. You live a long time. Navigators live centuries. It is part of the mutation, and this is where the cost begins, the part nobody sees from outside. You will outlive everyone you ever knew. Every crew you work with ages and dies inside 15 of your years. The captain you started with died of old age, and so did his son, and his grandson had the ship when you were 200. You remember all three. To you, it was recent. You stopped learning names somewhere in your 3rd century. Not out of cruelty. The mind simply refuses to invest in something that ends in 15 years. The mutation continues as well. By your 4th century, the skin grays, the bones lengthen, the face stops being human. Late century navigators wear veils and do not leave the dome, and servants leave food outside the door. You die at 463, in the chair, in transit. By then, your eye works 3 hours a day instead of 8, and the house knows this, and the house keeps you in service, because there are not enough young navigators, and the Navy contract is worth more than one old man. You lose the beacon on the 7th day of a transit. The ship falls out into an empty sector, 40 light-years from target, with 9 years of fuel aboard. They will find you in the chair with the eye open. The crew will not open the dome. They will die outside it, in the corridors, over the following 3 years. You're doing, and none of them will ever know, because every transit record stays locked in there with you. The Arbitrator. You are not police. That was the first thing they explained at the Schola, and they explained it harshly, because your life expectancy depends on it. Policing on your world is done by the local enforcers. They catch thieves, break up fights, and take bribes, and the Imperium looks past all of it, because petty theft does not threaten the Imperium. The Adeptus Arbites does something else. You enforce the Lex Imperialis, the single law across the galaxy, and in that law there are roughly 6 clauses that actually concern you. The tithe, heresy, rebellion, harboring a psyker, contact with Xenos, a planetary governor refusing an order from Terra. Everything else is not your business. Murder is not your business. Murder belongs to the local enforcers, unless the murdered man was collecting the tithe. You live in a fortress. An Arbites precinct is not a station. It is a fortified block with firing slits, its own reactor, and 3 months of supplies. They are built that way not out of paranoia. They are built that way because every Arbites precinct gets besieged eventually. Your precinct holds a district of 4 million. There are 200 of you. The arithmetic does not trouble you. It is not supposed to work, and it does not work. What works is reputation. When the hive riots, you do not go out to suppress it. 200 men will not suppress 4 million. Everybody understands that, including the rioters. You go out and do one thing, demonstratively, on the recorders, as loudly as possible. You take the block the ringleaders came from, and you erase it. Not the ringleaders, the block. 18,000 people, of whom perhaps 40 are guilty. You know 40 are guilty. Your superiors know. The man on the shotgun knows. The point of the act is not punishing the guilty. The point is that the next block along watches and decides not to start, and the next block does not start. That is the hardest part of your work. It functions. It functions so reliably that in 22 years of service, you have had to do it twice, where it might have been 40 times had you never done it at all. You carry a shotgun and a shock maul. The shotgun is short, for corridors, because your entire world is corridors. The maul is not for killing. The maul is so that the man standing next to the one you hit hears the sound and does the arithmetic himself. You wear a full-face helmet. You never raise the visor on duty. That is not protection, that is doctrine. An arbitrator has no face, because the law has no face. A citizen who has seen your face has seen a man, and a man can be argued with, appealed to, bought, or traced to his family. One day the planetary governor comes to you. He comes politely, with a gift and a proposal. The tithe will fall 14% short this year because of the harvest, because of the mines, because of circumstances. He suggests you record the shortfall as natural loss in transit. He offers a great deal. He offers so much that you understand he is not 14% short. He is a great deal more than that, and has been for a long time. You hear him out to the end. Then you send an astropathic dispatch to Terra. 2 years later, a fleet arrives. The governor is executed, along with his administration, his family, and everyone holding office above a certain grade. 11,000 people. The world passes to direct rule. The tithe is raised by a third as a penalty. Famine begins, and roughly 2 million die in the first year. You did everything correctly. You are commended. You die in your 23rd year during the storming of the precinct in a food riot caused by that same penalty. You hold the second-tier stairwell for 9 hours. Then the shells run out. Then you do. You are killed by people who do not know your name and do not know their famine began with your honesty. They see a helmet. The helmet is the law, and it has to come off. The Commissar. You do not remember your parents. Both died in Imperial service, your father in the Guard, your mother in the Navy, and the Imperium paid for that the only way it pays. It took you into the Schola Progenium. The Schola is a boarding institution for the orphans of Imperial servants. They taught you from the age of 4. They taught you the Imperial creed, tactics, marksmanship, rhetoric, and how to speak to 300 people so that they stand up and walk toward a place they will not come back from. The last of those was the main subject. The rest came attached. At 16, they gave you the examination the Schola calls an interview. They brought you into a room where a man in guard uniform was kneeling. He was about 30. He had abandoned a position during a siege. They had brought him back, and the sentence required carrying out. They handed you a bolt pistol and left you alone with him for 10 minutes. He talked to you for all 10. He explained why he left. He had a reason. Everybody has a reason, and his was a good one. It concerned an order that destroyed a company for nothing. You heard him out. Then you fired. The examination was not whether you would fire. The examination was whether you would listen first. A commissar who shoots without listening breaks inside a year because he does not understand what he is doing. A commissar who listens and shoots serves 30 years. You serve 29. They attach you to a regiment. You do not command the regiment, the colonel does. You stand beside the colonel, and the colonel is afraid of you, and that is also part of the design. Your work is 3 things. First, you speak. Before a landing, before an assault, after a rout, you come out in front of a formation of men who have already done the arithmetic, and you speak to them in a way that makes the arithmetic irrelevant for the next 2 hours. This is your primary instrument, and good commissars use nothing else. Second, you watch the officers. A colonel who spares his men at the cost of an unfulfilled order is more dangerous to the Imperium than a platoon that ran. You write reports. You write them often, and everyone knows it. Third, you shoot your own. Everybody makes films about the third one, and everybody lies about it in both directions. You have done it 11 times in 29 years. 11. Not 1100, and not 11 a week. A commissar who shoots often is a commissar who has failed, because every shot means the first instrument did not work. You remember all 11. You can give the names, the ranks, and the circumstances, and in 3 of the cases you still think you were wrong. The worst was in your 16th year, a sergeant you had known for 8. He pulled his section off a position because the position was not holdable, and he was right. It fell 40 minutes later along with everyone who stayed. He was right, and you shot him in front of the formation. Because if you do not shoot him, then 2 men fall back at the next position, and then 4, and then there is no line, and the world falls, and 900 million people live on that world. You explained that to the formation. The formation understood. The formation held the next position for 4 days. You explained to nobody that you did not sleep for 3 weeks afterwards, because a commissar is not entitled to that particular detail. You die in your 29th year, in combat, which for a commissar is statistically unusual. The regiment was pinned in the ruins of a processing complex. The colonel died on the 2nd day. You took command, brought 400 men out through the service tunnels, and stayed at the entrance with 6 volunteers to hold the passage. Volunteers were found. 6 men from the regiment that had hated you for 29 years. You held the passage for 40 minutes. The regimental dispatch will say the commissar was killed covering the withdrawal. Nothing more. Commissars do not get obituaries, and their names are not entered on the regiment's roll of the fallen, because a commissar is not formally part of the regiment. A month later, a new commissar arrives. He is 22, fresh out of the Schola, and at his first parade, 400 men will look at him in silence. He will think they hate him. He will be wrong, and he will not find that out for another 10 years. The Sister Hospitaller. You do not fight. The orders Hospitaller belong to the Adeptus Auroritas, but you wear no power armor and carry no bolter, and the Sisters of Battle look at you with a shade of condescension that is never spoken aloud. You hold a scalpel. For 26 years. You were also raised in the Schola Progenium. Half your order are orphans, the other half came voluntarily, and the voluntary half usually leaves within 3 years. You work a field hospital attached to an Astra Militarum regiment. The hospital is 4 tents and a cargo container holding everything you have. You have analgesic for 40% of the wounded. That is not a supply failure. That is a Departamento Munitorum standard, calculated precisely. The Imperium knows that roughly 60% of arrivals will die or be discharged regardless, and spending the drug on them is inefficient. So you choose. Every shift. A man arrives, you look at him for 8 seconds, and you decide whether he is in the 40 or the 60. 8 seconds, because there are 19 more stretchers behind you. You have a protocol. The protocol is good. It was written by people who understood what they were doing. Head wound with tissue loss, 60. Amputation above the knee in field conditions, 60. Penetrating abdominal with contamination, 60. You follow the protocol in 98% of cases. About the other 2% you tell nobody, including your confessor. The ones who fall in the 60 are not abandoned. They are carried to the 4th tent, and a sister sits there and holds their hand. And that is your work as well. And you did it yourself for 4 years before they moved you to surgery. There is no analgesic at all in the 4th tent. There is a voice. You saw a space marine operated on. Once, in your 19th year, an apothecary of the chapter was working in the next tent, and they called you to hold an instrument because his own serf could not keep up. You stood beside a creature 2.5 meters tall, with a 3rd lung and a 2nd heart, and the apothecary worked in silence for 40 minutes. And he had more supplies on his table than you had in the entire hospital. The Marine lived. He did not thank you. He did not look at you at all, because to him, you are part of the tent's equipment.
You were not offended. You were thinking about one thing. He had the drug. You requested a transfer that year. It was refused. Once a year, the order inspects. A sister superior reviews the accounts, the drug consumption, and adherence to protocol. In your 22nd year, you are reprimanded. Your analgesic consumption is 4% over standard. The superior does not ask where the 4% came from. She knows where. All superiors know. And all of them once stood in a surgery themselves.
She reprimands you because if she does not, in 2 years it is 8%. And in 5, the hospital runs dry by mid-campaign, and the men in the 40 die. You accept the reprimand. You thank her for the correction, as the order's rule requires. The following year, your consumption is exactly at standard. You corrected it out of the 4th tent because there was nowhere else left to correct it from. You remember the 2 you moved from the 40 to the 60 to do it. A boy of 18 with a thigh wound who would most likely have lived, and a sergeant of about 40 who most likely would not. You carried the boy to the 4th tent yourself and sat with him for 2 hours, which your post did not entitle you to do. You die in your 26th year of sepsis. Not in battle. The hospital stood 12 kilometers behind the line. You cut your hand on the broken edge of a clamp on the 4th day of continuous work, treated it correctly, and it did not help because there was almost nothing left to treat it with. You die over 3 days. They carry you to the 4th tent because, by your own protocol, you fall in the 60. Beside you sits a sister you trained 7 years ago. She holds your hand and reads the prayer about returning to the Emperor's embrace, because you are 41, and by her classification, you are young. You hear it, and you understand exactly which prayer she chose. You do not correct her. She has work left to do. The hospital register will record, Sister of the Order, cause of death, sepsis, non-combat losses. Non-combat losses are entered in a separate column and are not included in the campaign totals. Your regiment will lose 11,000 men in this campaign. You are not among them. The Death Corps of Krieg. You were not born, you were grown. There is no childhood on Krieg, in the sense the word usually carries. You came out of a subterranean hatchery, one of a batch, and the first thing you saw was a concrete ceiling. You learned to walk in a corridor with no windows. You learned to read from a drill manual. You put on a respirator at 6, and you have taken it off 4 times since, all 4 on medical grounds. Krieg has not been habitable for 15 centuries. 15 centuries ago, Krieg was a prosperous hive world with billions of people on it. Then the High Autocrat declared independence from the Imperium, and most of the planet backed him. One hive stayed loyal to Terra. Ferrograd, under Colonel Jerton, the 83rd Krieg Regiment. Jerton understood the arithmetic. There was no fleet coming to relieve him, no order to surrender the world had arrived, and sooner or later Ferrograd would fall. So on the day of the Emperor's ascension, he put every atomic weapon on the planet into the stratosphere. The war ran for another 500 years after that. Atomic strikes, a burned surface, tunnels, generation after generation, until the Loyalists won on a world that by then had no water, no air, and no soil left. 5 centuries later, Krieg returned to the Imperium, and since then, Krieg has been paying. That is what they explained to you in your first year of instruction, and you understood it correctly. Your world committed treason 60 generations ago. Your world atones for it by supplying the Imperium with the finest infantry in the galaxy and asking nothing in return. You are part of the payment. Not a soldier, an installment. You look exactly like everyone else. Greatcoat, respirator, goggles. No face. The entire Corps has no face, and that is not aesthetics. It follows from the fact that Krieg has nothing to breathe, and from the fact that a face is not required by your system. You have no name. You have a number and a unit designation. They put you on siege work because siege work is what Krieg does better than anyone. Not assault, not breakthrough, not drop. Siege. A siege goes like this. You dig. 18 hours a day, in mud, under artillery, in a respirator that does not come off. The trench advances 40 meters a day. The enemy fortifications are 11 kilometers away. Do the arithmetic yourself. 275 days. You dig for 275 days. Over that time, the unit will lose about 2/3 of its strength, and the replacements will arrive from Krieg, and they will look exactly like you. You do not need motivation. Commissars exist in Krieg regiments as a formality, because there is nothing to suppress. Recorded desertions across the entire history of the Corps are negligible. You are not afraid to die. And this is the part Allied regiments never understand. It is not fanaticism and it is not narcotics. It is that you were raised in the conviction that your life is a debt incurred by your ancestors and that it can be repaid in precisely one way. Death in the Emperor's service is not a loss to you, it is a settlement. Once in your entire service you broke procedure. You were 23, in your 4th year at the front, and after taking an enemy line, you stood in a captured bunker where a photograph was pinned to the wall. A woman and 2 children. An enemy soldier, a man in the opposing army, had hung a picture of his family above his bunk. You stood in front of it for 8 minutes. Not out of pity. You did not know what you were feeling because you had no word for the state. You had simply never had a photograph or a bunk or the thing in the photograph. Then you went out and continued the clearance. You die in your 8th year of service, in a detonation. The siege was in its 2nd year. The trench lines had closed to 400 meters, and command authorized a subterranean mine attack. Your unit dug the gallery under the enemy positions for 11 months, 2 kilometers, in darkness, in clay, under constant threat of countermining. You were in the tunnel when they blew it. That was not an error. The charge was fired on schedule. The schedule mattered more than evacuating the diggers. The order said so in plain language, and the order had been read to you in advance. Nobody objected. There was nothing to object to. The detonation destroyed 600 meters of the enemy line. The advance began 4 minutes later. It succeeded. The summary will read, "Mine attack conducted successfully. Losses within projection." Within projection, which means you were counted in advance, back while you were still digging. And the last life. They found you at 6. The same way as the astropath, on the same denunciation from the same kind of neighbor, and the black ship took you on the same run. The difference began on Terra, at the sorting. They assessed you for 12 minutes. Measurements, questions, something cold touching the back of your neck, and a man in a mask said 2 words you did not understand, and they walked you down a corridor that was not the one half your batch went down. You did not qualify for astropath. Not enough will. You were 10, and you flinched during the assessment. The rest go into the fuel. Your corridor leads down, a long way down, for hours, by lifts and stairs, beneath the Imperial Palace, into a depth where the walls stop being stone and become something else. It hums down there. Not a sound in the ears, it hums in the bones, in the teeth, in the thoughts. And the further down you go, the harder it becomes to hold your own name in your head. By the lowest level, you no longer remember what your mother was called. They put you in a queue. The queue is long. It moves. It is full of people like you, of every age, from children to the elderly, gathered from across the galaxy, and nobody speaks, because at this depth, speech no longer works. About 1,000 people move through this queue every day. Every day. Not per year, not per week, 1,000 a day, for 10,000 years. And the queue has never once been interrupted, because the black ships run on a schedule, and the schedule was drawn up with margin. You stand in that queue for 4 hours. In 4 hours, you work out what is happening. The understanding does not arrive in words. Words have stopped functioning. It arrives whole. There is something ahead that is going to drink you. It has done this 1,000 times already today. It will do it 1,000 more times tomorrow. And it is not evil. That is what finishes you. You expected hatred. You expected a monster. What sits ahead is a thing that does not want this and cannot stop. Because if it stops, the Astronomicon goes dark, and the ships stop moving, and the Imperium fragments into isolated worlds inside one generation, and everything standing between humanity and the warp is gone. You reach the front of the queue. You see him, a corpse on a golden chair, withered down to the bone inside armor that has not been removed in 10,000 years, seated in a machine that stopped being understood a very long time ago, and has been repaired by guesswork ever since. Tech priests around him who do not know the function of half the assemblies. Custodians around him who carry out what remains of the 1,000 every day. And above all of it, over the ruined body, you feel a mind. Enormous, level, running without pause, holding a light over the galaxy. It notices you. For 1 second out of 10,000 years, he looks at you personally. You do not know what is in that look. You are too small to read it. You are 10 years old, you weigh 28 kilograms, and you last ate yesterday. Then they drink you. It takes less than a second. The soul goes into the machine, the body settles onto the floor, a custodian carries it aside, and the next in the queue steps forward. Your name is nowhere. It never entered a register because fuel is not accounted for by name. It is accounted for by volume. Your contribution to the history of mankind measures roughly 3 seconds of the Astronomicon running. 3 seconds of light. In those 3 seconds, a navigator 6,000 light-years away held his beacon and did not turn toward the second one that does not exist. The ship arrived. It was carrying food for a world where an Arbitrator's precinct stands, where 800 million people live, where below level -64, a line runs, and somebody stands at a grate pulling out metal. That is the whole of it. That is the entire structure. 11 lives held the machine up. The 12th, the machine ate, directly. Not one of them was heroic. The vox-operator passed coordinates, the recycling operator pulled out metal, the Guardsman dug a trench, the Voidborn struck a valve with a wrench, the servitor loaded crates, the astropath sent dreams, the Navigator stared into an ocean, the Arbitrator erased a block, the Commissar shot a man who was right. The Hospitaller chose the 40%. The Krieg soldier dug himself 2 kilometers forward. None of them did anything that would reach a chronicle. And remove any one of them, and the rest comes apart. The Imperium does not work in spite of this. The Imperium works because of it. And what holds it up is not faith, and not the Emperor, and not the Space Marines. It is quantity. It is the fact that there are enough people to spend continuously for 10,000 years without noticing the loss. You lived 12 lives. What survives of them in the Administratum archives is 4 lines, 2 decommissioning marks, and 1 inventory number. That is more than most people get.